Hello, welcome to the Gastroenteritis Blues. My name is Dan Valpone. Steve and Emily are not quite here yet. Steve will be here eventually, and Emily hopefully will be there. But luckily, we are here with Alec Sturm from NetsDaily's to talk what else but James Harden and really all that matters in the Sixers world right now, it seems. So, Alec, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on, Dan. You say it's all that's been dominating Sixers world. I think Nets world has been preoccupied with the James Harden stuff just as much in the past week. So I'm happy to get on and talk anything but Harden. Or no,
Well,
quite the opposite. Talk
yeah,
Harden.
that is going to be the topic. But like you bring that up, like what's the vibe among fans before we get into the real stuff? Because obviously the Sixers, I think most of Sixers fandom is thrilled by this news that this is a possibility. Obviously, this is not this in particular, but just how everything has gone is a bit of a disappointment from a Nets perspective, and this seems to be kind of the culmination of that. What is the vibe there?
I think the Nets, the vibe among the Nets fan base is kind of waves of acceptance, is how I would describe it. Harden has had a pretty serious down year, especially after looking great last year in the regular season at least. And it got to the point where kind of like after every game, reporters are asking Harden, they're like, do you think you're back to your old self? Do you think you're back at 100%? How's the hamstring feeling? Is it rest? Is it rust? Like what's going to make it click for you? And then he looked great after Christmas. So people are like, oh, he's back. And then he took a downturn again. That was kind of the first half of the situation. Second half of the situation were the Harden rumors and specifically the Philly Harden rumors. Where at first, and I'm sure even you guys thought this, it was like, oh, Morey's just trying to go in for it here. He's like sending in these little birds and they're trying to see what they can dig up, and there's nothing actually here. And then every week there was a new report, and it was more and more real. It was Mark Stein, and then it was Jake Fisher. And then there's the news from Shams that he's available. So I think it's waves of acceptance.
So as someone who's obviously been paying a lot of attention to the Nets this year, obviously Harden's getting older, and this is a down year for him. He's still a great player, but by his standards, undeniably a down year after, like you said, before the hamstring injury last year, I think was really playing himself into the MVP conversation.
Yes.
Obviously, this is a guy who has a reputation of someone who can be a bit pouty and can let that affect his play. How much do you think this down year has to do with it's a bad situation, he's just straight up unhappy, versus this is a true decline where, maybe he gets a little better if he gets traded, but we're not going to see last year? Where do you fall on which of those it is?
That's a great question. I think why is James Harden declining has been a well-versed topic amongst Nets fans all year. I think if James Harden gets traded to Philadelphia, and I think he will be in the next few days, and I'm sure we'll get to that later.
Absolutely.
I predict he will be. If he is a Sixer, I think you'll see his production go up from the 4 points against Sacramento, from the lackluster efforts we've seen this year. I don't, however, think it'll go up to what it was last year when he was second in MVP voting before he went down with that hamstring injury. I think his athleticism has taken a notch or two down. I think not only his burst, but his deceleration has been decreased. His shooting accuracy is at all-time low, but I would still expect a bump from this. He's a pure negative right now, which isn't who he is. He's still a star player. So I would expect him to be a top 20 player on the Sixers.
And, you mentioned you think this is going to happen. We're definitely going to get more into that, and we'll definitely get into, what our packages are going to look like. But I want to ask you, from the Nets perspective of Ben Simmons. Now, we talked about this a little before we started recording. I don't really see this as, the Nets having a ton of options here, because Harden has the option to become a free agent this summer. If he's going to get traded, if someone's going to trade for him, it's going to be a team that he says he's going to re-sign with. And I think that really limits the Nets' options. That said, they're not just going to trade him for nothing, because, one more postseason with Harden is better than nothing. So when you look at what the Nets can get from the Sixers, Obviously, that's going to be Ben Simmons and, at least one depth piece, maybe picks, who knows what it looks like. From their perspective, with Ben and then with whatever else, what is their motivation here? What is their motivation to take on Ben, a guy who definitely has value, but I know a lot of teams are skeptical of right now. What is it the contract length? Like what is it there?
Well, I first want to touch on something you said, or what you said just then, which is that like the Nets having options. Because I think something we've had to do, both fan bases, especially these kinds of trades and then sign-in trades down the line, is honestly explain to fans. Because the same way I'm sure there are some Sixers fans who are convinced, oh, we have all the leverage, the Nets are screwed, he wants to come here. There are Nets fans who think, oh, we have all the leverage, we're the ones trading the guy, you have to give us what we want. So there's a bit of a gray area. There's a middle here, and the Nets have a lot more options when it comes to the trade deadline, because they can always tell Philly, we're good, we're going to try to make a playoff run, we're going to try to get Kyrie vaccinated or whatever, and we're just going to bet on our health and make a run. Once we get to the offseason, if James Harden is held out in Philadelphia, Nets only have many more options, but they have a lot more this trade deadline. As for the package, or no, you were asking as for why they'd be interested in Ben Simmons. I think you think back to kind of the D'Angelo Russell, Kevin Durant sign and trade from a few off seasons ago. The Warriors brought in D'Lo really only to flip him for Andrew Wiggins to the Wolves half a season later. And
Steve just popped in.
I'm here.
And the Nets, I mean, Ben Simmons is still an all-star level player, as I'm sure Daryl Morey wants you to remember. Ben Simmons, 4 years on his contract, the Nets envision him. I know the Nets envision him as like a Draymond Green power forward role, a guy who can really help the Brooklyn defense, a guy who can play a facilitating, connecting role to Kyrie Irving, who likes to be off ball, to Kevin Durant, who isn't an initiator the whole game. That's how they see him.
Assuming that it's Ben and, maybe Danny Green, Seth Curry, something like that, and we can get more into that later. How do the Nets view themselves, and how do you view the Nets stacking up after that, right? Because obviously right now things aren't going great. They're the 6th seed, I want to say, but they're still finals favorites. And if you check any sports book, they have the Nets as their final favorite. Yeah, they're getting Ben. They're losing Harden. I know Harden's not playing his best. They probably are getting worse. I know Ben fills a need that they don't really have, but you're still giving up James Harden for Ben Simmons at the end of the day. And meanwhile, the Sixers, who, by the way, are ahead of the Nets in the standings, are picking up James Harden for basically nothing because Ben is not playing. So how is that kind of worked into how the Nets are viewing things? Like, do they believe that, a Kyrie, KD, Ben Simmons team is still better than a, Tyrese Maxey, James Harden, Joel Embiid with hopefully Tobias Harris plays well kind of team?
I don't know what the Nets think, and I think the question of sportsbook odds is interesting actually, because clearly the books see the Nets with Harden as the best team because that's ceiling. But I think it depends a lot on whether or not Kyrie Irving can become a full-time player. And that can happen in two ways, really. That can happen in him getting vaccinated, doubtful. That can happen in the city changing their mandate, also very doubtful. And it depends on how Durant looks coming back from this MCL. I don't think anyone's worried about that. He's going to come back in 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, and he's going to be Kevin Durant. It does depend also on Joe Harris, who's really damn good. He's the Nets' 4th best player and one of the best shooters in the NBA. And his injury has a lot in the air. There's this very non-zero chance that he could be out for the season. If he returns, I see Joe Harris, Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, a full-time Kyrie Irving still being the best team in the East. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So, Alec, first of all, hi. Thank you for doing this.
Nice. Good to meet you, Steve.
Good to meet you. The Nets, they played today. You guys probably touched on that slightly. There were a couple quotes coming out of the Nets today. First, Steve Nash was asked, basically, are you guys trading James Harden? He said, actually, no, we're not.
Shockingly. I thought he would say yes.
Yes. There's the famous quote from Daryl Morey to Shams right before trying to trade him for James Harden last year. Ben Simmons is an important part of our future. We're not trading him, of course. Famous last words. Went ahead and tried to trade him. Everybody's saying, what are we expecting Nash to say? He could have given more of a non-answer, more of a that question is more for Bobby Marks. But Nash did say, no, we are not trading James Harden. I want to know if you think that means anything. And then Kyrie Irving, who is certainly one for odd quotes, was asked about James Harden and whether or not he's concerned about the 8-game losing streak. He said, first things first, getting healthy and then setting our team up for the rest of this season post this trade deadline. And then Kyrie Irving, when asked if he thinks James Harden wants to stay with the Nets, says he seems committed, but who knows what's going to happen. Do you have any reaction to those quotes? Do you think there's something or nothing?
Oh, I think there's a lot there. I'm really happy you brought that up. I think the reaction to the no quote from Steve Nash is accurate in that he could have said, oh yeah, that's Sean Marks's prerogative. He's the GM. So it was a hard denial from Steve Nash, which means they're playing hardball. They're playing public negotiation game. That's what that means. We're not going to dance around the issue. We were talking earlier about kind of the Nets options, and the Nets have a lot more options at the trade deadline than they do versus the offseason. Because their real pitch of leverage to Daryl Morey, to the Sixers is, hey, we can just run this playoff run. We can just do this with our guys. And so that's kind of what Steve Nash is saying. It's like, we're not looking to trade him. We want Harden on this team. We want to make that run. As for the Kyrie Irving quote, I read that as Kyrie thinks what's going to happen is what I think is going to happen, which is what I think there's going to be a big upheaval of this Nets roster. I think you're going to see something of the likes of the 2018 Cavs, where it was just a whole different team around LeBron. I think they're going to really retool around KD. Kyrie will probably still be there. And that's what they're going to do moving forward post-trade deadline. Thank you, Kyrie.
I want to get into packages soon. The last thing I want to ask you before we do is, the Nets got killed today. I think scored 29 points in the second half after scoring 75 in the first half, and they were still losing after that. It was an unbelievable first half. They've lost 8 straight games. How much does that change? Whether that changes. I know we've been hearing these Harden whispers for a while, but how much does this 8-game losing streak change things from the James Harden side? How much does it change it from the Nets being truly willing to shake things up side? Obviously, you only have half of Kyrie, and you don't have any KD right now. And even with that said, an 8-game losing streak for this team is unthinkable with the players they have anyway. That's how much has this really awful stretch changed how things are going with Brooklyn's thinking at this deadline?
I don't think the losses are affecting Sean Marks, the GM of the Nets. I don't think they are. I think there are a few general managers in the league that are better at their jobs than Daryl Morey, and Marks might be one of them. I don't know, top 5. I think what they are impacting is less so than the losses, but the way the games play, in that James Harden has to dribble a lot, has a high usage, is relied a lot in the offense. I think that and Kevin Durant's MCL injury is really what pushed this final gear of him trying to get to Philly.
And let's just get into it. So kind of, I'll give you I'll just give you, a couple things on my mind, and I'll just leave it open-ended for you, because I really want to hear your thoughts here without me directing him too much. So, Ben, from a Sixers perspective, you can't just give Ben, you have to give something else, because Harden's making a lot more money. From a Nets perspective in this trade, though, it's also possible, and you let me know what you think, that they don't really want to take back much more than Ben. They might not want a Seth Curry or a Danny Green, or if they do, they might want to send something out somewhere else, possibly get a third team involved so they can try to duck the luxury tax. So what do you think it ends up looking like? How much are the Sixers going to have to send the Nets besides, just Ben Simmons? And what do the Nets even really want? Who do they consider worthwhile salary versus just someone as a filler for the Sixers?
I haven't run the numbers, I'll be honest, but I don't think there's a world where the Nets conduct the luxury tax. I like right now they're saying they're paying the second most tax ever. I think Joe Tsai is pretty married to the tax at this point, whether he wants to be or not. The Nets are kind of setting these negotiations high. The Nets are asking for Tyrese Maxey. They're asking for like a pick this year or picks in the future. And then I assume they all go down from there with like guys like Seth Curry and Matisse Thybulle and future firsts. What's really interesting to me is I think you saw the report. I mean, all the Philly guys came out with the report. I think Keith Pompey and Kyle Neubeck, like everyone was out with the report immediately that, oh, the Sixers aren't giving up Thybulle. He's too young. And Seth Curry's the godson or whatever. And Tyrese Maxey's like, it's a prodigy. So I mean, which makes sense. They're good players. There's a reason the Nets want them. So my question is, maybe you see a deal where the Sixers are throwing in like 3 or 4 first-round picks, because like that's what the Nets gave up for James Harden, and the Sixers don't want to give up their role players. So maybe the Nets get a bunch of firsts and then swap those with Joe Harris's salary for a guy like Harrison Barnes or a guy like CJ McCollum. Yeah, that's my thinking.
So now, besides what the Nets want, what do you think it ends up being? And you mentioned the possibility of all these firsts. If it's not that, do you think it has to be a deal where Maxey is included? I personally don't. I imagine the Sixers draw the line. Maybe there isn't a line, but I imagine that the line they have laid down now is not Maxey. Do you think that they'll be able to hold that and still get Harden by the deadline?
Do I think the Sixers will be able to get Harden without giving him Maxey? Yeah, I think so. I think it'll be like, I think what happens for the deadline will be like Seth and like 2 firsts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know you're confident this happens. If you had to put a number on it, what could you tell us, percentage-wise?
I think there's an 85% chance James Harden is a Philadelphia 76er in a week.
Wow.
There's
I
the
love
clip.
that.
Hey, I have a question. Do you like right now? It seems very Philly and Brooklyn. At any point, does this, because Harden's very good, does this open up at all to anyone else now? Because there's been so much just Philadelphia, Brooklyn smoke, and that's very influenced by the ties between Morey and what's his fucking name, Tad Brown, the guy in the front office, and the rich guy Michael Rubin and the Meek Mill and all of the other friends. Like there's lots of friendship happening. But at any point, do you think that Brooklyn, whether it's legitimate or not, will rope in, who's also interested and involved in this James Harden now sweepstakes is the Clippers? You know what I mean? Is a third team here to sort of muddy the waters and make the Sixers go.
Miami is the name
exactly.
I would expect too. Yeah.
Tyler Hero, some team with a young player who actually is playing basketball, funnily enough, who might make the Sixers a bit nervous and might make them, even if it's a leverage ploy by Brooklyn to make them cough up somebody like Thybulle or like Maxey. Like, do you foresee that at all? Because right now it seems very Philadelphia and Brooklyn staring at each other in a room. Like, do you think that, legitimate or not, like a third team comes in here?
I think that's a good question. And I think that's a good question because at a certain point, the Nets front office is like 7 people. And we're going to be like 3 or 4 days away from the deadline. When these reports first came out, we were like 6 or 7 days. Like the clock is ticking here. And like I said, I anticipate the Nets to make like a big, if the Ben Simmons trade happens, and I think it will, and I think there's going to be a lot of firsts coming in. The Nets don't have a lot of use for these first-round picks. They're going to be looking to bring in guys from every corner of the trade market, from teams that are selling, whether it's the Pacers or the Portland Trailblazers or whatnot. So, like, do the Nets have the time to call up Miami?
Yeah,
and call up LA?
Right.
Like, Sean Marks is really good at his job, but I don't know how much time they have. And I think these other teams in the league they're focused on their own trade deadline stuff. And I think they know what's going on between Harden and Philly and the Nets. Like, the intel has been out on this situation for a minute. I can tell you that much. Like, this hit the public a good week or 2 afterwards. So I'm sure teams have known about this for a minute, and like they're not dying at the opportunity to give up their picks and their most coveted young asset, because that's who Ben Simmons is, sitting at home or not. Ben Simmons is Philly's most coveted young asset, even if they're trying to move him. But other teams don't have a Ben Simmons just lying around at home.
Right.
And from their perspective, right, if Harden is telling everyone he wants Philly, then why trade for a guy who wants to be somewhere else on a potential expiring?
Exactly.
I mean, Harden is very I don't want to say I think James Harden, if whatever team James Harden is in after the deadline, I think if they make the finals and he doesn't have to, and he is not like getting hurt and it's a stable situation, I think he'll resign. If he's on the Heat by some matter of chance and they make the final, he's like, yeah, I'll stay in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was very opportunistic thinking from Daryl Morey to be like, oh, the Nets kind of look like they might be a mess. Let's go slip in here. Chad Brown, do your thing.
So you mentioned that, this has been something that was out a couple weeks before it hit the public. Do you think that is kind of when we saw the whole seemingly public Kings momentum fall apart? Like, we had Daryl Morey on the radio in Philadelphia saying to Mike Missinelli on 97.5 that there is a deal to be made with the Kings. And that, he's looking for a top 40 young player. He would take, he doesn't have to be a top 30 player anymore. Now he'll take a top 40 young player. And everything seemed to be angling at, the Kings. But we want more from the Kings. It seemed to be a leverage play at the Kings. Like, couple days later, it's like, well, the Kings aren't giving Fox or Halliburton, and the Sixers are not talking with the Kings anymore. Is that because, the Sixers heard about this Harden thing and started demanding the world from other teams? Like, they knew that they didn't before have this, and now this is something that is a real chance for them?
I think Daryl Morey was going to ask the world from the Kings anyway. But yeah, those timelines line up a little bit. And that's the Harden stuff was quiet at the beginning of the year and kind of just gradually picked up. And I think those timelines lined up a little bit. Yep.
And, another thing you mentioned I want to bring up is, you mentioned that the Nets say they get some picks from the Sixers. Like, they need time to do something with that. This can't be, if they want to make use of that on their roster this year, this can't be 257 on Thursday trade. This can't be we started the league call before 3:00 and we finished it at 3:10 trade. The Sixers are in the same boat though. Like, the Sixers, that's not a leverage. A place the Sixers have leverage, because the Sixers are going to want to fill out their roster around Embiid and Harden. And so if both teams have an incentive, and of course, Daryl's ridiculous and I can't predict what he's going to do, and he could easily take it to 257 to save a second round pick. But when it comes down to, having time, that benefits both teams. So do you get the feeling that because of that, this doesn't, because it feels like these things usually go to the deadline, but do you think that maybe this is an exception, that both teams kind of want to get this done?
I think there's a difference between kind of waiting to call the league office versus because I see this being a 3-team trade. I see this being a 4-team trade even maybe. So it's less about the final league call, which could very well happen in the waning minutes, and more about we need to figure out who that third team's going to be. We need to figure out because the trade's going to be Ben Simmons plus asset. Mm-hmm. So the Nets need time to figure out those assets that are coming in, combined with assets we already have, like Joe Harris, like Nick Claxton, like a first-round pick. Who wants that? And once we have all that together, then we can call the league office, and that'll take a week. That's how trade deadline week works.
You think we're at a point where those conversations are those advanced conversations? Those who's the third team we're bringing, who's the fourth team we're bringing? Do you think we're at that point in discussions now, or do you think we're still at the what are the Sixers giving?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know anything.
Fair enough.
I assume they'll start asking eventually, but I don't know. It's these guys keep their secrets tough.
Yeah, no, I didn't even know if you had a gut feel on it, just because it is hard to read out, but I have a hard time believing that Daryl is not going to just really jump at getting Harden. Like, he's Daryl's guy. Daryl's already missed him. You know,
What Daryl is telling the Nets, oh, we're gonna get him in the offseason anyway. We're not worried. We're gonna give you. I don't know what the Sixers want to offer. I assume it's like Simmons and Danny Green or whatever. But that's what Daryl's saying. And everyone, and the intel is Daryl's full of shit. Daryl wants him bad. So
and I think
if
that is
Maxey's in
definitely
that
true.
deal, and I think the question is like, how long are they gonna haggle over Maxey? Like, does Maxey take them 3 days? Does Maxey take them 1 day? Like, because the Nets really want Maxey. So that's that.
So, one thing I'd love your thoughts on is, there was this Ramona sort of weirdo piece that came out earlier in the week that we're going to talk about in the later half of this podcast. But within it, it came out that Simmons got vaccinated. He was a long holdout. He was busy doing his own research, but he did get vaccinated earlier this week or in recent weeks. And people in Sixers Twitter universe, now that this thing comes out about Brooklyn and Harden and the Nets opening up conversations with Philly, people are connecting dots and basically saying, boy, maybe he knew that talks could be imminent with Brooklyn. So I want to ask you about that and whether or not you think that that's a reasonable conclusion. And also just sort of like, what is the temperature sort of, regardless of Harden, in Brooklyn about Simmons? Like do people, fans or the team in Brooklyn, like, are they fond of Simmons' game and his fit around guys like KD and Kyrie? Like are they generally high on him, the Atlanta series notwithstanding?
So the first thing you asked, like the kind of the Ramona piece, the similar kind of connecting of dots happened, I think, in Nets world. And another thing that happened a day or two before the big Shams piece is that Joe Harris's agent, Mark Bartelstein, came out and talked about, oh yeah, Joe Harris's injury might need a second surgery, which we already knew, that had been reported the day before. But he was like, but we're not going to definitively know until about 10 days or so. People are like, 10 days? So right after the trade deadline. And that came out about 2 days before. And Joe Harris is very much as a player in the same vein as Seth Curry, who my prediction is you get Seth Curry, maybe you get a pick. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Mark Bartelstein, Joe Harris's agent, knew this was coming and put that out so that the Nets wouldn't trade Joe Harris. And I think that makes sense. It's kind of the same thing as the Ramona report 2 days before. Rich Paul puts that out, whoever. And the nature, and even though I didn't know about this Shams thing until it happened, the nature of this whole Harden saga, this whole Harden to Philly saga, has been that things have been ruminating days in advance. So it wouldn't surprise me. As for how people like Simmons in Brooklyn, I don't know if you guys remember the 2019 series with Jared Dudley and all that stuff.
Sure.
I think that's been. I don't think that's been forgotten, but like the team is very different now. Dudley isn't on the team anymore, and Ben Simmons is still a damn good player. Like he'd be a great connector, and he'd be a big help to the defense, and he's a good passer. And I think Nets fans are starting to come around on him, honestly, out of dislike for James Harden, who's really kind of kicked the team to the curb a little bit.
And I would point out I don't even think there's a one that's close. Ben's best playoff series of his career. Like,
oh yeah,
like by far.
I was in the building for Game 3. Him and JJ Redick just carved them up.
Yeah. And D'Lo couldn't do a thing.
Yeah, he played great on him.
Yeah. And not that he's actually, I mean, there's people are all over on D'Angelo Russell, but regardless, what Ben Simmons did defensively on him was still impressive, even if you're someone who's high on him or low on him.
That was a great D'Lo year.
Yeah. So I guess we've taken up a lot of your time. I appreciate you coming on. Do you have any other thoughts about the situation before we let you go?
Oh yeah, no, thank you so much, guys. My thoughts are, I hope this gets figured out so I don't need to text and bother Philly people and bother my friends for too much longer. And
I love it.
Is there anything we can promote for you, get out there for you before we get out of here?
not really. It's been a bit of a quiet month for me. I do a lot of like Brooklyn's G League team. I do a lot of Long Island Nets stuff. I go to their games. I do some film stuff. You can check me out on Twitter, Alec_Sturm. All my stuff is on there. And yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on. Let's have a stressful trade week.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's gonna be a great one. Appreciate you, Alec.
And we're back. Hope you enjoyed that break. Emily's not here. Emily has a bowling career that she's working on, setting some spares and strikes out there. Big thank you again to Alec. He was a great guest. So the Sixers this week, they had a just tremendous win over the basically full strength Memphis Grizzlies. They had two sort of gross losses against the Washington Wizards and the Dallas Mavericks. And then today, a very fun win against the Chicago Bulls. They have beaten the Bulls now 3 times this year. Joel had a very casual 40 points, 10 rebounds. He is the best. Dan, let's start with the Grizzlies game, which I really thought there was no chance they would win. And Maxey was just going head to head with John Morant. And weren't you there?
I was there Monday and Wednesday. So I was at both home games this week.
So that had to have been one of the more exciting Sixers home games in a long time, right?
Oh, for sure. And it was by far, regardless of like atmosphere being there, just the best non-Joel game that they've had in so long.
Oh my God. It was so cool.
It was awesome. It was a great win. They followed it up with a couple bad losses. It happens. It's tough when they're putting so much on one guy. They had a great win. Everyone stepped up at the right time without him. And, Joel, by his own standards, had a rough couple of nights. But I think that regardless, and they had a great win today, but that Monday night win is proof enough that you have to go in with this team, that you have to give this team a chance, because without Joel, they beat the team with the 3rd best record in the league. And it wasn't, they hit shots and Maxey played great, but like, these are things that aren't going to happen every night, but it shows that they have talent on this team. They've struggled in general without Joel, but I think they have pieces that complement him well, more so than ever before. Like, I think the fit is a lot more normal this year. Maxey is this guy. It was great to see him so excited after that win.
See Joel got so heart. They've really got heart. It's so cool.
They do. It would be so exciting to see them show belief in this team, in the players they have, because we're talking about, and I think I'm getting it slightly off topic, but it's obviously what's on everyone's mind here, is like, when we talk about teams that are like, okay, we're gonna go make a run here, it's either like, let's trade a few 2nd round picks for some role players. But for a team that's gonna go get a star, it's like, well, you have to give up someone who's playing really well, probably, who is like sad to give up because the fans like him and he might not have the talent as that star does, but he's been a big part of like the culture of the team, and he's a reason you're at the point where you feel comfortable going after a star. Like, I think, just staying on the topic of the Nets, like that was that Nets team in that Nets series when the Sixers beat them 4-1 before they got Durant and Irving. Of course, they were able to sign those guys outright too. But like, to come up at the trade deadline and have this team that's playing really well, that's showing, that they can build this culture together, that they can fight hard and care about each other, to be able to add a great player to that with like almost no subtraction on the court is unbelievable, right? Like, Ben is a non-subtraction on the court because he's just not playing. This is not a comment on how he is when he plays, but he's just not playing. And then, you throw in a Danny Green or a Seth Curry, or like, maybe a Thibault if you somehow lose these negotiations. I don't know how it ends up. I really don't think it's Maxey. But in like the grand scheme of things, giving like one of those guys is just not the end of the world. And it would suck to lose Thibault in particular, I think, and maybe also, Curry, when he's playing well, can really fit well with Joel and would be interesting off of Harden because Curry running the offense is something that I despise. So having Harden would kind of help with the offensive weaknesses that he has. But in the grand scheme of things, it's fine. Like you're giving up one role player who's good to get an all-star, and that's not going to eat away at like what all of these other guys. It is not, this is not four players we really like to get Harden like the Nets did last year with guys who were, built that culture to begin with that let them get Durant and Irving. And I would love to see, I know this is like a long answer to something you didn't ask, but like that Monday game was like, we don't even have to give up most of these guys. And they showed so much heart without Joel. They're clearly capable of being a supporting cast if the Sixers can bring in another very good player with Joel. And they fight hard. Like I would just love to see, I would love to see it happen. I'm really rooting so hard for it because I think this could be a really, really fun year. I think it could be the most fun postseason we've had.
So, in terms of the games, Joel scores 40 Sunday. He now moves into the sole league lead in scoring per game. NBA.com's MVP ladder now has him first. He
All
looks
betting sites have
incredible.
him as the favorite.
Betting sites have him as the favorite. I don't know that he can do this without the trade, and we'll talk more about the trade stuff in a second, but he looks tremendous. He looks, they're getting to a harder part in their schedule, and it's going to be harder for them to win games. They've had a softer schedule, and they've, right now they beat Chicago. They're one game out of first. And they're getting to the deadline, and it's like, here we go. Let's find out what's actually going to happen with this guy who's sitting at home, who's the second best player on the team, and are they going to make something happen with it?
Third best.
Third best. You're right. You're right. Niang is good. You're right.
Okay, come on, give Tyrese Maxey some credit.
Man, Maxey is so good, and he's so cool. I mean, that play that ended the game in Memphis, I know it was a week ago now by the time people are hearing this, but, Thibault saving it and lofting it to Maxey, and he just lays it in at the end of the game. So cool. I mean, people must have been going crazy in the stands, huh?
It was awesome. I mean, it was so much fun. I was just happy I got to see a close game once they announced Embiid was out, and for them to show up and play like that, it was awesome. And Tyrese Maxey outplayed Ja Morant. I'm not saying he's a better player, but he outplayed him.
No, and Ja is so cool and so good, and having he's like a top 10 at least MVP guy this year, which is just it's so cool. So anyway, we referenced this with Alec. Also at the beginning of the week was Ramona Shelburne's piece about Ben Simmons, about what it's been like for Ben, in these past few months, about how he's driving around trying to find somewhere to work out. And about
not because he has to, though. She specified it's not that he has to do this. He's just too, he refuses to confront his teammates. Not even confront, just be around them. Like, we'll wait for them to leave. Like,
and about how it's so uncomfortable, and about how she didn't like that Joel mentioned his non-dunk against Atlanta in Game 7 as a turning point, when Ben never invoked Joel's performance against Toronto
when he was a plus 90 something.
Right. Just like unbelievable display of never taking any blame for anything continually by Ben Simmons. And people have talked about this by now, but my favorite part was Doc Rivers' reaction to this when he spoke to Tom Moore. Great scoop by Tom Moore, who's been on the beat for forever. And I really enjoy when a sort of old school beat, man or woman gets a scoop like this. And so, the day the story came out, Tom Moore talked to Doc, and Doc said, "That's the first time I've ever heard of that. There's nobody that's been more supportive than me. I've had a tape someone sent me of almost an hour of me over and over praising Simmons. You heard me
That
last year.
sounds like
every
the
day.
worst tape ever.
Worst tape. It's
That was
honestly,
that was torture as it was happening. I can't imagine
Yeah.
all in one place.
yeah, that's what they use. They use this in war camps. They show this to people. They just put them in a solitary room and show that video.
You
It's
don't
all
know
pop.
basketball if you think that Ben Simmons
Scoring
has to
is
shoot the
important.
ball for an
Yeah.
hour, just over and over.
It's all posturing. That's why you haven't heard me. I don't get involved in that stuff. I'll leave that up to the front office in Ben's camp. I'm staying out of that part. But listen, some of this stuff I laugh at and I feel bad. I think Ben's a good kid. I want Ben to do bad. Oh, nope, sorry. That's my fault. Doc did not say that. I want Ben to do well. That was Freudian on my part. Doc said, we need people to tell us the truth. Unfortunately, as a coach in the NBA, I have to do it a lot. I've accepted it as a coach over the years. Some people handle it well and some don't. Sometimes I don't deliver it well, even though I try. I'm not perfect either. At the end of the day, everything I try to do is about winning. The people who handle that can handle me very well. The people that can't probably don't handle me well. And I don't lose an ounce of sleep over it.
I love that. That's the
It's
rare
great.
thing Doc says to the media that I don't hate.
Right. I always have supported Ben. I want him to do well. It's just the excuses and all that stuff. One of the things I tell my players is that respect is a two-way street, especially the young guys. You can't expect to ignore us or not listen and then want us to do something different to you. You have to respect each other to be successful in life. Great response. Loved it. Loved it.
Love
Great
it.
response.
Love it.
Thank you, Doc. And it was just a bullshit story. It sucked, and I thought it blew. And
Yeah. I mean, it was so bizarre. And it wasn't like a report where we got something really interesting or new there. It was like basically a continuation of Ben's excuse making with like just thrown into, the media circus is his situation where, anything published by, ESPN about Ben Simmons is, something that we're immediately going to read and can be framed to be related to a trade no matter what, because he's the guy asking for the trade. But it's like, it felt like the Simmons camp saying like, oh, we're going to go make our excuses and try to get some sympathy from this story. It
And it was
wasn't
like-
sympathetic. No.
but I guess that was the point, though. I guess like the point was pity me, pity Simmons before the trade deadline, and hopefully he'll get traded. So,
But I don't think anyone really took that away.
I guess, I mean, there are Simmons fans out there who think he's been a victim this whole time, and
But they weren't
need that
on
article.
our side, and then
They didn't.
we're
Right,
like,
they didn't.
oh,
need that.
Ramona has some points here.
Right. All right. So this week, there were a million reports that you and I consumed and hated, each one of them, by the carload, that all said, it's not happening. Simmons is not getting traded. Everything, it's crickets. That like, I'm not even, some reporters are saying I'm not even checking in anymore. It's like, he's the biggest fucking guy on the trade market. You're not checking in? Like what?
That was Jake.
It's Jake, who we love. Jake, check in. This is the week, buddy. Check in. What are we doing? You're not checking in. What are you talking about? Check in. So everybody was saying, Kyle was saying, Woj was saying, what Woj did say, like, there's not much activity, but Morey will make calls. And, they were saying a lot of the same, which is that Daryl's price is too outlandish and nobody's going to meet it. And like, it read to me just personally that like Daryl is back to give me an all-star or I'm not trading him, or it's got to be like a billion picks and nobody's doing that. So I was very dispirited by this. I was not happy about it. And then we see the report, which you've talked about with Alec, that Shams had, that the Sixers are expected to try to trade Simmons for Harden, and that now Brooklyn is opening up discussions with the Sixers for this trade. So obviously I know your general feelings, which are, let's go, like, do it, make it happen. But like, how surprised were you when you saw this? I mean, I was shocked to see this. Now, things are bad in Brooklyn, as you guys talked about before. they keep losing. Harden, there's been all this smoke about Harden and Philly. He's a free agent in a few months. But I guess I was just surprised because for me, it's like, wait a few weeks, Kevin Durant will come back. And when Kevin Durant plays and when Kyrie is legally allowed to play, they're probably going to be really freaking good, and they might just go ahead and win, but maybe not. And maybe they're kind of screwed in this current position. And maybe Harden really, really wants to get out of there sooner rather than later. And maybe pieces like Jake's piece recently is true in that, like, they're really not meshing well and there's a lot more than meets the eye. So, like, what was your reaction when you saw it other than jubilation?
Well, I mean, first, like, my heart sank because I was like, not in a bad way. I was like, oh my God. Like, first I thought a trade might have happened. And then I read the word, I think, what was it, like, expected to, and then I finally was like, I saw, Harden and Philadelphia 76ers. So immediately I panic. I finally take a second to read it. And I'm like, the Philadelphia 76ers are expected to be interested in James Harden. I was like, well, yeah, they've been. Thanks, Shams. And then I read, obviously the big pieces, and the Nets are now, open to taking offers. And that was all the work I was getting done that day. And I freaked out. And yeah, I mean, it was like, oh my gosh. And it's so unbelievable that we're at this point. And all I can think about is last year. I mean, for regular listeners of the podcast, you know that I haven't stopped complaining about the Sixers missing out on James Harden. Like,
just to say, the exact wording is the Nets are now open to discussing a deal. Yeah.
And I haven't shut up about this. Like, even when I didn't even think it was possible this year, I still was just so pissed that for whatever reason, and blame can be shifted or put on Daryl depending on what you believe. I honestly don't care. It was his job to get it done. If the Rockets, to me, I was all year like, well, if the Rockets hate him and that's why we didn't get James Harden, then I blame him for that too. Even if he was the reason Harden wanted to be here in the first place. I was so upset that we didn't get James Harden. And for it to be, we missed out on a postseason, but he was kind of hurt that postseason anyway. And I know he's not been as good this year, but it's so unbelievable that this has come full circle, that we now once again have a shot to get him, what looks like a better shot than it was last year. And I'm cautiously optimistic about this, but I can't believe it came back to this. I really, I was buying all the reports. It was like you said, that this was going to go to the deadline or go past the deadline. This was going to be a summer thing. And I was upset about it. Even if you really think you're getting Harden by taking it to the summer, I was still upset about it because I was very much in the camp of, you don't need Ben for that, because all you like, regardless, you just need Harden to say, I want Philly more than any other team. And that gets it done. And I was just upset that they weren't even going to get like a helpful player this year, like a helpful starter or a guy who's like helpful this year, but also just like a backup plan if you can't end up flipping him for Harden this summer. Just something. I was pretty bummed, and this changes a lot. I do lean that it's going to happen. I agree with Alec that I feel better about this happening than not happening, and it's just so great. It's as good as it could have gone right here. I mean, you could argue, with age or whatever, maybe you prefer Beal. I still don't, but I think you have more of an argument now than you did last year, just based on Harden's really been struggling. Not that Beal's been phenomenal either. Lillard's hurt, so I mean, you could say, whatever, maybe you loved him. I don't care, but he was one of the guys that was like the dream scenario. And I am honestly kind of shocked that they're willing to negotiate here for the reasons you said. I mean, I would stick it out if I were them. I would, but I on one hand, I get it. Like, they're probably not going to bring back Irving, and Harden has the choice to leave. And so I get that. And I get that, Ben gives him something they don't really have, and he's making, whatever 30 something million, but locked in for these 4 years, and he can't go, although he, I guess, do what he's doing now, but I don't see that happening. They don't have enough fans to care to scare him off. But I kind of get it from their perspective. I'm just shocked it came to it, because to me, it's like they've played what 16 games with that core, with all three together at the same time. Like, it just feels early to give up on it, even with as bad as things have gone. Even when one's hurt, they're still a really good team, and so I'm pretty surprised. But like, again, it all kind of goes back to how weird everything has been. Like, I mean, Kyrie's still not vaccinated, and I know that they're saying that's not, the reports are like that's not the big thing here. I just can't imagine it going downhill in time for this deadline if Kyrie is playing every game. And so I guess thanks Kyrie for being a big weirdo. Not actually, I'd rather him get vaccinated, but hey, I will take James Harden. I'm still so shocked that this is a real possibility, but I'm fully buying it as reality. I'm just so shocked that it's happened.
So yeah, it feels like it happened fast, but I guess it didn't, because there's been this trickle out of flirtation through the media of Harden, like, sort of leaking, or his camp leaking that he's interested, and he didn't sign the extension in Brooklyn, and they just haven't been very good this year, which has been shocking. And KD got hurt, and he's easily their best player, and Harden has not been all that great this year, and he's had a couple injuries, and Kyrie didn't play the first 30 games of the year, and then he's been a part-time player. Fucking Paul Millsap requested a trade 3 weeks ago. It's just been very weird. So, it's just, so to me, here's where I come down on it, is that if it's real, if this Shams report is real, and Shams is one of the two biggest people.
It's real. I feel very confident it's real.
Because Woj hasn't said it, right?
Well, Woj went on NBA Countdown on Saturday night and basically stumbled his way through a horrible, I've never seen that man less confident on anything report about how, and there wasn't much there. It was like KD still wants Harden there. It was like, all right, well, KD doesn't have final say in this trade.
But he also said KD wants people there who want to be there.
It was just like a non-report. It was like, I think he's not really sourced here, and he asked KD what he thinks, and that was all he had to say. Because it wasn't like he shot it down either. And I've never seen that from Woj. He had a lot of time. I mean, there was over a full day between the Shams report coming out and this NBA Countdown appearance for Woj to have something, and he really didn't have much. I'm not sure why. I can't explain why he doesn't have much on this, but he just doesn't. I mean, if he disagreed with Shams, he would just say that something else is true. This is what I've heard. There was none of that. He was he almost danced around everything Shams said, but what Shams said was by far the most important part, which is the Nets are listening on James Harden offers. He had nothing really to say about that. It was kind of shocking. I still think Woj probably breaks the trade. Just throwing that out.
So here's what I'll say. There is no way, none, that Daryl Morey, if James wants to go to Philly, which it seems very clear that he does, that Daryl Morey is getting turned down for Harden twice in a year. There's no way. I'm telling you, he's a freak. He's a weirdo. There's no chance. He's not going to.
Well, and he shouldn't. I hope, and listen, and even if you're a Morey defender and you love Morey and whatever, I think there's probably some merit to the defense of him not getting Harden the first time. I hate that everything he does can, anything doesn't go his way. There's a lot of excuses made about him. We've talked about this. I think there's probably something there that maybe certain things are out of his control, but I'm sure certain things also probably weren't. and part of it might be, the timeline about his negotiating, or it might be, when he offered when he decided to even really get serious, or anything, or how he, carried his relationships through that trade process. There's no doubt he's, even if the main thing was not Daryl's fault, he's definitely looked at what happened with Houston sending Harden to the Nets and thought, what do I need to do better? I'm sure he's thought, there's something I could have done better here to give myself a better chance of getting James Harden. And I'm sure he's thought about it a lot. I'm sure he's obsessed over it. I'm sure he's probably going to do something differently, because I think he's going to learn from, even if it was a minor mistake, just even if it wasn't ultimately what cost them getting Harden in the first place. I think he's so in, and I think he's going to take less of a risk of this not happening. I think there's, especially with Simmons just fully out, as opposed to being, someone that you presume to be a useful player for your team. I think that there's a lot less conservatism going after Harden on this time. There's no, well, do we really want to give Ben for him? I don't know, right? Like, obviously that goes out the window here.
Right.
I don't think and we talked about it earlier, like you see in the local media, they're not giving Matisse, Curry, whatever. I would imagine they come off of that pretty fast if there's a firm offer. If there's a firm offer, some of these guys that aren't Maxey are probably a little bit easier for the Nets to pull than they were for the Rockets to pull from the Sixers.
So let's talk about that part of it, because Emily's not here. But the one thing that we know about Emily, and which is really well represented, I think, for good reason in Sixers Twitter and Sixers media, is that people don't want to give up Maxey in this deal for Harden, which I think honestly is really, really fair. Because first of all, our understanding is that Harden wants to go to one team, which is Philadelphia, and that Harden's a free agent in 2 months, and that Harden's not having a great year, and that the Sixers kind of have the Nets by the balls here, in that Harden.
I don't fully agree, but I understand that that's something.
I know what you mean, because they have the player that the Sixers want, and the player that the Sixers have isn't playing basketball. I agree.
And this is not a sign, like they're a contender now. And
Yes.
I think that it's not by the balls for the Nets
correct.
can easily say, you know what, we'll roll the dice and take James Harden into the postseason along with Kevin Durant and Kyrie.
You're correct. I guess to that, I would say, for them to be opening this discussion, I think things are worse there than meets the eye. I think that things are probably,
for sure.
Yeah. I don't think that the Nets are in the position to get Simmons and also the Sixers' young guard, who's like star potential guy. I don't see that there's any reason they should be able to get him right now. Like, for their guy who's 2 months from free agency and not putting out a list of teams. You know what I mean? Like, if you put out Philly, Miami, Boston, blah, 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 like, yeah, that would be tough,
I mean, it's most analogous to Anthony Davis saying, in a contract year, I would like to be traded to the Los Angeles Lakers.
Right. So I just really don't think they should have to do that. And also, I understand the risk from the Sixers, because of course there's a world where the Sixers trade for Harden. It doesn't go great. Just like hypothetically, I think it would go phenomenally. That's why I'm dying to get him. And honestly, at the end of the day, I'm like you. I would do what it takes. Like, I need it. I need it. I'm sorry. I need it. I got to do it.
We've been on this for.
I got to do it. I'm sorry.
This is like a year and a half of me trying to make this happen.
But I honestly don't think there's any reason you should have to do that. Like, augment it with picks, augment it with Curry or with Green. Like do whatever you got to do. But like, that guy should not have to be in it. Like, he really shouldn't. And also, like, he doesn't necessarily make any sense on the basketball team with Simmons and with Kyrie. Like, do you think that Maxey should need to be in this trade? I know that you would do it if push came to shove, but like just realistically speaking, do you think that he should have to be in it?
No, I don't think he will be.
Yeah.
Like and like you said, I mean, I'm kind of at the same point I am last year, because anything that you say about, Harden being worse than last year, well, Ben is now a zero. And as great as Maxey looks, he's not anywhere near James Harden level. And I think that, he's the most likable and exciting young guy we've had since, Ben and Joel coming up. And well, more likable than
that, yeah.
But just like in terms of excitement, he's not the prospect Ben was, he's not the prospect Joel was. But he's the best we've had since then. And I get that to a lot of Sixers fans and people in general, and I'm not saying that he won't become a star, but I think it's a lot less likely than people think. Like, it's just hard. It's hard to take that real leap to stardom. And I know he works hard, but sometimes that's not enough. And I'm not saying it won't happen for him at all. I'm just saying, like, it's so far from a guarantee. And because we haven't seen anyone even have a shot in forever, and the last couple of guys who did for us became all-stars, I think that we kind of overestimate how likely that actually is to come to fruition, to have that guy become a perennial all-star. And I love Maxey. I don't mean to take a single thing away from him. I badly want to keep him. And, I was even saying, if I'm the Sixers, I would be I want to make this happen as fast as possible so I can not give the Nets time to change their minds, not give Harden time to change his mind. So I have time to build a team around them. But I would hold, if they're saying right now it takes Maxey, I would say, well, let's see if it takes Maxey in a couple of days. I would. Like, he is that level to me. I don't think they have to include him. For reasons you said, like fit, I think that, even though just as an asset, they would of course prefer Tyrese to anyone else. As just a fit, like Seth or Danny makes more sense, or Thibault makes more sense. And I think that the Sixers can offer a good enough package without him that the Nets are not gonna not take a deal that they feel works for them just because Maxey isn't in it. I really am confident that the trade happens, and I'm also confident that Maxey is not in that trade. And I like Maxey along with Harden. They would finally have like two true ball handlers. And whoever stays, I mean, they'll send out, probably a Seth or a Danny, and that those guys are important, and that's a real loss. But to not lose Maxey is so important. You now have two guys. You can never have to have a lineup on the floor without someone who can dribble the ball, or someone who can pass the ball. Obviously, Maxey is not at Harden's level at those things, but he's been good enough to make us a successful team all year. And he's now the kind of guy, and we've been talking about staggering Maxey and Joel. Well, he's now the kind of guy who can just run a second unit, as opposed to, having to have him out there with the starter. So Joel is a ball handler on the floor. I think it's regardless of their fit with each other, it just makes the Sixers so much better at the guard position. Obviously Harden makes you better, but having someone who lets Maxey, be on the floor anytime that star isn't out there to handle the ball is, I think, huge.
Yeah. I mean, Harden, Maxey, and Joel is just, and I mean, people have mentioned this, but he just
Tobias is playing better too, honestly. Now he's looking like the asset he was last
guy,
year.
It's like, come on.
Yeah, for sure.
Maxey just lengthens your runway so much. He just, Harden is not young. I'm not worried about, people are talking about the max contract you have to pay Harden. It's like, oh, we have to pay James Harden. It's like, fantastic. Part of this,
even if he sucks for like his last 2 years, you now have a 3-year championship window with Joel that you never had.
Yeah. It's like, we're Philadelphia, like, we have Joel, and we're lucky forever that we have Joel, but like, outside of, like, we don't get to pick and choose which superstar we get. So if this guy wants to come here, it's not that we need to kiss his ass, but it's like, let's get him here. And he's still really good and would be better with Joel, because everybody's better with Joel. So I agree. I don't think Maxey should be in the deal, and I don't think that he will have to be in the deal. What happens next? So, like, the day people listen to this is Monday. What are you expecting? Do you think that, like, do we have an official, like, trade demand? Do we have, like, what do you think is the next step in this that happens?
I don't think we need one. Like, I don't think Harden's going to make one because I think he's at a point where he still has a chance to win this year where he is, which was different than his trade demand from Houston. And I think he's unhappy there. The team knows it, and the team doesn't want to lose him for nothing. But I'm not sure Harden is in any rush to get out of there this second, right? Like, I think he'd be very happy to get traded to Philly now, or keep his options open and try his luck this summer. And if not Philly, then have his first free agency and be pursued by teams. I don't think there would be a trade demand. I think Alec made a good point where, the deal can be agreed upon before the deal becomes official to our knowledge. And the two teams can, for ease of the what is next, say they basically know what the compensation is from each side. For ease of what is next for each, and just the trade rules that come with players who have just been traded, it might be easier for the two teams, the Nets and the Sixers, to try to loop in other teams and make it a 3 or 4 team trade, as opposed to now they have restrictions on the assets they got if they want to flip them.
Right.
I think that's very possible. I think that's possibly what, part of the talk is now. I don't know. For what is next, I mean, there's definitely something next for the Sixers besides this. If you get Harden and Embiid, you're going to make another move to try to win this year. I feel like Tobias is playing well enough that it's not worth, like, he's no longer, and especially if you're getting Harden, you're not going to have cap space anyway. Tobias is no longer a guy worth getting off of. Like, you're not going to give Tobias an asset to get off.
Yeah.
And you're also not going to turn Tobias and assets into like a John Collins or something. Like, I would be absolutely shocked. And so I don't think that salary is going to turn into much else. I could see them trading second round picks to make moves around the edges, or, I think Furkan's salary becomes something that's very tradable. Paul Reed is something that you attach somewhere. I don't see anything too major happening. I just think it's too hard. And I think Tobias is still, I think he, like, the same place we've been, where it's like he just has more value right now with the team than than what you can turn his contract into, which is not much. And I think that's fine. I think if he's your 4th best player, and if he's going to be, making quicker decisions and shooting the ball better, and hopefully get some confidence back, be more engaged on defense, like, hopefully become a better rebounder of the ball, because they badly need that. Although Harden would help with that a ton. Like, these are things, if he can take some pressure off himself, make himself, into a useful, basically, 4th starter, which is what he is. The team is in really good shape. I'm sure there are moves to be made, but I don't think there's much big there. Like, this is the thing. There's something else you try to help this roster out. I would love to get, the thing that's been thrown around is, like, 2 seconds for, Justin Holiday is one a lot of people like, and that's great, especially if you're, using like Furkan's salary for something or whatever. But I don't see anything huge. I think that this is obviously the main thing, but I think it's like 99% of the deadline is this, and then there's something small.
Well, listen, wow, holy shit. Let's see what happens. All right, so we don't have a standings update for you. Emily is here. We refuse to.
Did you get Emily's picks?
Yes, we have Emily's picks.
Awesome.
You're going to be shocked when you find out what they are.
I think I know what they are.
So this week, these Sixers play 3 home games, unless they're not at home. We don't know. They play Phoenix Tuesday. Phoenix has, I think, only 10 losses. Phoenix kicks the shit out of everyone.
They're 42-10.
They're 42-10. Hilarious.
So they are in the second half of the back-to-back.
Okay. That is the last game before the trade deadline. And then we have the trade deadline. And the prediction there, so we're going to predict 83 things this year because we're going to predict, is Ben Simmons traded? Yes or no? And then the Sixers play Oklahoma City at home and then Cleveland at home.
All of those are correct, by the way, which is, I'm really proud of you.
We did it. Phoenix, Ben Simmons traded, yes or no? Oklahoma City, Cleveland. Emily has decided wins for all 3 games and yes to Ben Simmons getting traded. So I will say, man, Phoenix is tough. I'm gonna say that's a loss. I really wish that they would win that game going into the trade deadline, but I'm gonna say that. And man, so I really am at the point that unless the Harden trade happens, I don't think Simmons gets traded. I was at a low point heading into that news. Fuck it. Harden. Let's do it. Simmons gets traded, yes. And then we beat Oklahoma City. And then in Harden's first game, we beat Cleveland.
Yeah.
So 2 in 1 week, and yes, from me. Dan.
I'm going to say we beat Phoenix because I might be going to that game. And so that's, can't pick a loss where I'm going. Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's Harden or no trade, right? That's where we're at. And honestly, we're at the point where like it basically should, like this should be Daryl's attention if this is a real possibility, right? Like nothing else matters at this point. I'm gonna say yes. I do agree. It's more likely than not. Top players tend to go where they want to go. And like I said, I'm not sure Harden demands it out, but I think he's made it pretty known that Philly would be top of his list going into free agency, and that he's very frustrated with Brooklyn. And I think Brooklyn is probably frustrated with him adding to, all of the stuff they have going on all the time, like all of the BS with Kyrie, with the fact that they're always injured and they're old and whatever. And now you have Harden leaking this stuff. I think both sides are ready to move on. I think the Sixers are ready to pounce, and I think Ben gets traded for Harden. I do. I think we beat the Thunder because everyone beats the Thunder, even though we'll probably be a bit shorthanded. And then for that Cleveland game, to me, is Harden's hamstring healthy? That's my only question for that game. If it is, I'm going to say it is. I'm going to say it's a win. Beat Cleveland, 3 wins and we get Harden. What the hell? Let's do it.
Wow, unreal. All right, that's it. Hey,
you like me picking that Saturday game based on James Harden's hamstring availability? I mean,
unreal.
This is let's just call it like he's here already.
Let's do it, man. Who cares? Listen, we're gonna be back with you. Listen, I think we're gonna go ahead and do a podcast after the trade deadline on Thursday. We're gonna try to work that out. We might stream it on YouTube. We're gonna
follow
try
us
to
there, subscribe to us, whatever you
subscribe to that. Do whatever you can.
Gastro Blues, the Gastroenteritis Blues on YouTube, and you can give ratings on Spotify now. Give us 5 stars. Give us 5 stars on the Apple podcast, wherever they let you rate the podcast. Go subscribe to us. Go give us 5 stars. We really appreciate it. Also, for everyone who listens regularly, we really, really appreciate you all, and we love you.
We love you. And thank you to Drew, who we love as well. And Emily, we miss you. We hope you had a great time bowling. Thank you again to Alec for doing the podcast. And best of luck to Daryl. Daryl, bring it home. Please. Please.
He knows what he has to do. Just do it.
Do it. We'll talk to you on Thursday. And we'll see you then. Let's do it.